Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilter's Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. Today's episode, number 58, I'm going to show you how to put directional prints on point. But before we get to that, I have a real quick opinion. Some time ago, we showed quilts that were scrap appropriate and quilts that were not scrap appropriate. And one in the not scrap appropriate, I showed Trip Around the World, because you had to use the same fabric in the same position all throughout the quilt. Di from Sister Chicks has proved me wrong. She did a video of a scrap kids Trip Around the World quilt, and it turned out fantastic. It worked because she used the same color fabric in the same position. They weren't the exact same fabric, but they were the same color fabric. So if you have a lot of scraps and you want to make a trip around the world, you can do it. We'll provide a link to Di's video below. Now let's get to the episode. This is the panel from Michael Miller Fabrics called Wildlife Portraits that I wanted to make into a quilt. And you can always just cut them apart, put borders on them, put them together straight across. But I find that putting things on point makes things really interesting. So this is what I made with this panel. There are 20 squares in the panel. I used 18 here. Let me show you how we did. When you're putting squares on point, it makes a difference if you have fabric that's directional versus non-directional. Here's a square that is non-directional. Here's a square that clearly has a top and a bottom and sides. If I put this block on point and lay it like this, it makes no difference to the construction, to the view of this square. If I take this one and I put it on point, now his head is sideways. So in order to make this square have the direction of the animal head correct, you have to make it a square in a square to get this back to being in the correct direction. So the first thing you have to do is cut apart your panel and decide what size square you're going to make. And in my case, I chose a 10-inch block, and I used the Deb Tucker rulers, and this one is the large square squared that goes up to 12 inches. This is going to be a 10, and as many of you know, most of these panels are not printed straight. So we have to square this up and make this as straight as we can. So I'm going to take my ruler and line a straight line up on the bottom, and then I'm going to try to center my sidelines as best I can, and anything extra of the black I'm going to try to make sure gets into the seam allowance. So the first thing I want to do is get a straight cut. So there's my first cut, and that's just to get a straight line. Now I'm going to turn this so that I have the bottom of the the bottom of the square towards me. And now I'm going to take my 10-inch lines, and I think it's kind of hard to see on the camera, but the ruler is clearly marked where the 10 line is. And so I am going to center it, and you can see I don't have any extra fabric to cut off here. This is all print, but up here I can cut some off, and it's going to make no difference. I'm not going to cut into the ears at all. So the next thing I want to do is center my lines as best as I can. And then I'm going to, I got to move a little over. I'm cutting a little far away from my body for the demonstration. I would have this way closer to me. if I were actually doing this. There we go. 10-inch line, 10-inch line, 10-inch line. So now I can do this again and get it just the way I want it. And I got one more to do. And the reason you sometimes have more than 4 cuts is because you're trying to get everything all centered, so you might shave off a little on one side and find out that that's not enough. So there we go. There's the last one. And this is what I mean about not being square. You can see some black here, and it tapers to almost nothing there. But I'm okay because that's going to get into the seam allowance, so I don't care. And that just wasn't cut straight. That I would fix. So now you have your centers of your square and a square, and you just follow Deb's ruler that tells you for the 10-inch square you cut a 6 1/4 inch square, cut in half twice. So, and we've done this before. We've done square and a square so many times. You know, sew on one side, the other side press, so the other 2 sides press, and you use the other half of the ruler to square it up. Let's get to all the math. So now we know we're making 10-inch finished squares, and we have 20 to start with. So how are we going to lay it out? I always draw it out. So I have 20 squares. If I do 18, this would be my layout. And we have to alternate the colors. So I just draw it out A, B, A, etc. And if you count them up, you find that you have 18 blocks, you have 12 A blocks, and 6 B blocks. How big is my quilt going to be? Am I going to be happy with the size? 10-inch finished. You all remember you multiply by 1.414, so that means across the width of the block it's 14.14. So there's 3 across, so that means it's 42.5 essentially. And the length is times 4, so it's about 56.5. And now we want to make the quilt. So how much fabric do I need for my setting triangles for my square and a square? If you remember, the Deb Tucker ruler said I need 6 1/4 inch squares to cut in half on the diagonal. So I have 12 A blocks, so I need 24. Well, you can get 6 per width of fabric, so that means I need 4 6 1/4 strips, so that means I need 25 inches. The next measurement up would be 27 inches at 3/4 of a yard. If you're comfortable with just 2 inches of wiggle room, you're good. If you need a little bit more, purchase 7/8. B block, you have 6 of them, so you need 12 half square triangles. And then you get 6 per width of fabric. So you need 2 6 1/4 inch strips. That's 12.5. 3/8 is 13.5. So if you're okay with 1 inch of wiggle room, you're good. If not, go up to a half of a yard. You know how to construct the blocks, so you know how to sew them in rows together. What size do we need to cut our setting triangles? Switch out the boards, we'll be right back. We used to, in the olden days, have to calculate how big our side setting triangles and corner triangles would be. But there are charts that you can get online. I have this one from quiltville.com that I can see on the date down here. We downloaded and printed this out in 2013. I've been using the same chart for 10 years. Kimberly from that quarter shop, she also has a chart. But if you're math challenged, you don't have to do the math. I'm not math challenged. I still use the chart because I don't want to go through the calculations when they're all done for me already. So if we look here, and I'm not going to have the cameraman zoom in on it. If you go to the 10-inch square, it tells you side setting is a 15.5 inch square, and the corners are 8-inch squares. So just trust me that that's what it says here. So the side setting are square triangles. Why? Because you want the straight of grain on the outside of your project. You don't want the bias edge on the outside of your project. I always cut mine a little larger, so it says 15 and a half. I would cut 16. If you counted how many side settings triangles you needed on the diagram on the previous board, you would count out that you needed 10. So to get 10 quarter square triangles, you need 3 squares. You will have 2 quarter square triangles left over. On the corners, you need 4 corners, and so that means you need 2 squares. The chart said you needed 8, which means I cut 8 and a half. And so the way you would cut this from yardage is you wouldn't do 2 16s to get the 3 and then cut another 8 or 8 and a half, whatever. You can get your 2 8 and a halves out of the second part after you cut off your 16-inch square here. So you'll have a little bit longer. This only adds up to 32, so you're going to have 8 or 10 inches or so here left over, and you're going to have about the same up top here, and you'll have this hunk here, which goes into your scrap heap. That's the kind of stuff that you can't really help. It's going to end up in your scrap heap. But for the side setting and corner triangles, if you cut 16, that means you need 32 inches. You can get it out of 31 if you cut them 15 and a half instead of 16. That's 7/8 of a yard. Or if you want a little bit of wiggle room, you can always go up to 1 yard. Now my borders here, this little blue one, I cut 1 1/4 to finish to 3/4. And so that meant I needed 7 1/2 inches. So if you had it in your stash, great. If not, you could purchase a 1/4 yard of fabric to fit here. And my border, which is a companion fabric to the panel, I cut these at 4 1/2 to finish to 4, which means I needed 27 inches, and that's absolutely no wiggle room. So 3/4 is absolutely not even barely straightening it up. And one little miscut, and you're not going to have enough. So you probably want to go to 7/8 or 1 yard to get this border. But I really like my fabric choices. I think it just turned out great. There's so many colors in here. You could pick a goldy. You could pick a more orange than my more salmony. You can pick a more green than this tealish. You got so many options with this. And you could make it smaller if you wanted. There's just so many things you can do with these panels. Let me show you a couple others I made the same way. I'll be right back. I just wanted to show you real quick 2 other quilt tops that I pieced using the same technique. This quilt here was made from the panel, What Do the Animals Say? And this panel is no longer available, but it turned out to be such a cute baby quilt. And in this one, I bordered the side setting triangles, and I used a different fabric here than I used for the square and a square blocks. But I just love how this one turned out. I think a good baby quilt, even though it's a little bit large. In this one here, I also bordered the side setting triangles and corner triangles. And these squares are much larger. So while I only used 8 squares here, they finished to 12 inches. So it makes quite a large quilt. Did I already say this is from Jungle Friends from In the Beginning Fabrics? Really cute. Great quilt. If you have a panel with squares, especially with these animals on it, this is a great technique to use. That's it for today. If you enjoyed today's video, please like, share, and subscribe. And until next Monday, happy sewing.